And I'm actually one of four. We're all ex-employees of a company called ForeScout. In fact, we were early employees, and the core group that brought network access control to ForeScout. I'm not sure if you've heard of the name, but today they are the #1 vendor for network access control and endpoint policy for the large enterprise. So a couple of years ago, we started development, and last year we got funding, and in fact this summer we are releasing our cloud security platform. So we're all pretty savvy. We use the word cloud over and over and over again, but as we all know, there is no such thing as a cloud. It's just somebody else's server. And when we move our data, our corporate data, our confidential data, to the cloud, we're essentially just moving the data to somebody else's server. Unfortunately, we may or may not be moving responsibility to that server. In fact, this is one of the outstanding questions, and in fact, I think probably the most ambiguous part of the cloud, and that is, when I move my data, who's responsible for what? When it comes to keeping the computers up, the network up, but more importantly, when it comes to security. There are different layers of security. We talk about defense in depth, we talk about layers of security, and depending upon the service that you're asking from your cloud provider, you may or may not be responsible for certain layers. Now, when you get a server from Amazon, it is pretty clear that Amazon's responsible for keeping their network up and safe, and Amazon's responsible for keeping the hardware plugged in and turned on. But beyond that, you're responsible for everything else, not only for the application and the data, but the security of those things. But it's also true when you start moving up to software as a service or even business process as a service. So when you start using Office 365 or start using Salesforce, you're still responsible for security at some of the higher layers. So you're putting your data into Salesforce, you're putting your data into Box. It's your responsibility to determine whether that's proprietary data that should be shared. It's your responsibility to make sure that that data that is now publicly available should be publicly available. Now, how do you meet those responsibilities? Now, if security is the responsibility of the provider, you need some sort of third-party SLA monitoring tool. Now, if you're responsible for security at the higher layers, how do you do that? Third-party tools, and that's where we come in. So Avanan is a security platform to provide those layers of security. Now let's put things into context. Let's forget the cloud for a moment. Let's talk about your servers. How do you provide server in your security in your environment, where you have 100% ownership and 100% responsibility? You have a stack of security tools from a long list of vendors, names you've heard of. And in fact, I could talk to each one of you, and each one of you would have a different security stack in your data center. It would be multi-vendor. Now, we all know that there are companies out there that want it to be the full stack. Why aren't they the full stack? Why do you have a blend of different companies? Because they're customized to your needs. And no single vendor can be best of breed. In fact, any one of these might be best of breed today, or maybe they were best of breed previously, but I guarantee you 5 years from now, this list will change in your data center and everyone else's. So what happens now when, if this is your data center, you start moving data to the cloud? How do you provide best of breed full stack security? Because now your users are connecting directly to the cloud. So right now, it's a new industry called the Cloud Access Security Broker trying to solve this problem. And the way a lot of them are trying to solve this problem is actually putting a proxy between your users and the cloud providers. Now what this does is allow them to see every single bit that goes up to the cloud vendors, but we actually think this is not a good idea for a lot of reasons. Some of them are obvious to you. One is that they have to break that secure connection. Two, there is a point of failure, there's a point of latency there. And then, of course, there's the rollout. Is there a configuration change? Is it an on-premise proxy? Is this in the cloud or reverse proxy? This is the way the problem's being solved today. We don't think that's the right way. We believe that it's possible to provide that security, allow people to connect directly, maintain that secure connection, and provide that same level of multi-vendor security, defense in depth, but do it in a way that's out of band. How do we do that? We are a cloud-based platform on which we are running the technology from vendors you already know, vendors you've already vetted, vendors you already trust. We built a platform on which those run, and then we built a policy engine that wraps around those so that they can actually inform one another through a policy engine. So if your DLP scanner determines that this is proprietary data, that can inform your encryption engine to encrypt it. Or more importantly, it can inform the SaaS provider and set policy that is unique to that SaaS provider. In your data center, when you set a policy, you control the whole stack. But if you set a policy within multiple SaaS providers, there are two ways to do that. One is to go through each one of those providers and flip all the switches in the right direction. But if you want to set a policy for a particular set of users, a particular type of data, what we can do is actually wrap all of those so that when you flip one switch, it actually sets that policy across the board. So we are simplifying policy control within the cloud vendors. We are allowing you to run the tools you already know and trust in the cloud environment in an out-of-band environment. What's key is that because it's out-of-band, there is no agent, it's transparent to the user, and we can deploy in about 10 minutes. We call it one-click security, but more importantly, we turn the cloud, all the different SaaS vendors that you're using, into just another data center. So when you set a policy in your data center for some data leakage rule or malware rule, that can now apply to the cloud in the same way. And each one of those policies will be specific to the SaaS vendor. So what does that policy mean in Dropbox? What does that policy mean in Salesforce? What does that policy mean in Office? We apply your policy, flip all the switches to put that policy across the board. So I'm going to do a quick demo, but if you have any questions now. So this is our dashboard. It's fairly straightforward. We give you some headlines about what we've seen in this environment. This is a very simple box or Google Docs deployment. And you know within Google Docs, or Google Apps, that you can have publicly shared data. Now, of course, this customer has decided not to allow publicly shared data, but Google is strange in the fact that you can share with other people outside your environment with a link. No password, it's just a very, very complicated URL. And we can see all the data that is being shared outside the environment with this public link. Now, there is no password protection, and if anyone shares that link with anyone else, they have full access. But we can actually see who those people are that have access through that public link. Something that's also interesting, and this is actually where not using a proxy is very valuable, is the fact that a lot of data is transferred between users in the cloud, but even more data is transferred between cloud vendors. So when you push that little button that says share all of my LinkedIn contacts with all of my Exchange or Google contacts, that's a lot of data that may be transferring back and forth that you as an enterprise administrator would like to know about. So we can actually see that data transfer between different cloud vendors. We can tell you the security risk there and then perhaps set policy based upon that. We can see those external users. You might be, for all the right reasons, sharing data with other users. They may be sharing data with you. You are sharing data out. And then what's nice is that we can set policy. We can set policy by scanning every file, determining that some files are proprietary based on healthcare, credit card, and so on data. Then we can set a policy so that, one, it should not be in the cloud, or perhaps you do want it in the cloud but only shared within a certain subset of people, but of course it should not go outside your environment. Malware no longer requires a worm vector to spread across your network. Someone uploads a file, it gets synced everywhere. We prevent that spread by scanning files before they can spread. In our security stack, you essentially just choose the SaaS vendor that you use. And then when it comes to the app stores, when it comes to the security tools that we provide, we work with your existing SIM. We can scan all your files with all the major vendors for malware, advanced persistent threats, data leakage prevention, encryption, anomaly detection, and so on. So essentially, we are an app store for security in the cloud. Anything for time? I'm open for questions. Yes?
How do you address employee privacy?
So that is very important, employee privacy. You as an administrator are going to have the exact same access you would if that data were stored within your environment. So just to give you an example, I can go ahead and look at one of these files, and I can see the metadata about this file, but I am an administrator. I have metadata about that file, but if I click on that file, I will have zero access to actually see that individual file because I am not an owner, I don't have credentials, so the only thing you would have access to as an administrator is the metadata to determine whether it meets policy or not. Yes, sir.
So these cloud providers like Google Docs, Box, they change their structure all the time, right? How do you kind of adjust to that with regards to keeping track of all this data, who has ownership to what? They're constantly changing their APIs, their URLs. How do you adjust to that?
So the question is about all these SaaS vendor APIs. So we actually are finding that they are changing their APIs in our favor. In fact, we're even talking about from a business perspective, but more importantly, the difference between Dropbox and Box, or the difference between a consumer grade and enterprise grade SaaS, is their openness for APIs. We've had tremendous relationships with most all the SaaS vendors when it comes to grabbing access. Proxy-based systems are having to decode that SSL connection and essentially kind of screen scraping on the fly, trying to recapture the data stream. We're using APIs which are, one, supported by the SaaS vendor, and in fact they're very aggressive about supporting them because they see our offering of security as a way to drive their own business. APIs are going to be supported a lot longer and a lot more robustly than the screen scraping necessary using a proxy system.
Michael's going to be around for questions. Thank you very much.